cobblestoned streets of Edinburgh were thick with fog, a cold mist slithering through the snickets, carrying the stench of unwashed townsfolk and damp stone. The city was a labyrinth of shadows and ghostly, silent storefronts. Amongst them stood an unassuming lodging house, but what was taking place here, on this night, was nothing less than horrific. "Hold her still!" Burke exclaimed. "I'm trying to, you claddy. Next time you'll hold him down," Hare replied. Soon the woman lost her fight and fell listless. The year was 1828. A heinous spree was reaching its crescendo and plaguing the town of Edinburgh. Occasionally, another poor soul would disappear into the murk, never to be seen again. But soon, things would take an unexpected turn. Jamie Wilson, known as Daft Jamie to the folk of Edinburgh, was a lad of peculiar manner but sharp senses. His mind was not as addled as some assumed, and though he bore the slowness of speech and the strange gait of one touched by misfortune, he saw things others ignored. He had heard the whispers, the sudden silences when he passed, and he had noted the glances exchanged between Burke and Hare when they spotted him wandering the streets alone. He knew he was being watched. He had been dodging the two men for the better part of 2 weeks. He had slipped through alleyways and ducked into shops. But on this night, they were waiting for him. He was shoved from the street, and the door of the lodging house was slammed shut behind him, and before he could cry out, a pair of rough hands seized him. He kicked, he struggled, but Burke was strong, and Hare was quick. The cloth was pressed to his face, the acrid scent of whiskey and smothering wool filling his nose. Darkness took him. Shortly after, Burke and Hare arrived at the cold, drab, and dreary operating theater of a Dr. Robert Knox. The three men quickly went to work hoisting Jamie onto the frigid operating table. Feeling quite proud of himself and happy to collect the rather large sum of money the young lad was about to fetch him, Burke slapped his hand down on the lower part of Jamie's leg. He spasmed and Burke's gaze whipped to Dr. Knox, who exclaimed, "Nothing to worry about, Burke. We're still not sure why it happens, but it does, and I intend to figure out just why." This sent all three men into a roar of laughter. Burke reminded Dr. Knox, whom had known the young man laying on his table, that Jamie had been, as he put it, a few cards short of a deck. This usually meant that the specimen would be worth more to the surgeon. The going rate for the average specimen at the time would have been around £10, but for this reason Burke and Hare would be collecting more. "Yes, I know, Burke. And it is also for this reason that I would like to immediately begin to extract a few organs as quickly as possible. I will settle up with you men shortly. Have a drink and take a seat in my office, and I will be with you once I have sewn things up here." At this, the two men retreated to a small room just off of the auditorium. Dr. Knox made quick work of retrieving the organs that he had specifically wanted to preserve, and made a tight but shabby suture, and turned to sort and put away his tools. Suddenly, a loud clanging noise could be heard from behind him. Knox turned to examine where the sound had originated. When he did, Jamie was sitting upright on the operating table. "I was gone, but now I am not," he whispered, his voice now raspy and foreign to his own ears. Knox stepped back, gripping the edge of the table. The scalpel he had been holding clattered to the floor. "Impossible," the doctor breathed. "You were—" He stopped, eyes widening as Jamie moved. "I was gone, but now I am not," he whispered, his voice now raspy and foreign to his own ears. Jamie began to move. A terrible strength surged through Jamie's limbs. He sat up fully now, ignoring the stiff pull of stitches. He looked at his hands, cold, pale, but moving. He turned his gaze to Knox, and a slow realization dawned. Something had changed. He should not be alive, and yet he was. Jamie slid off the table. The chill of the wooden floor bit into his bare feet, but he barely noticed. Knox remained frozen in place, too stunned to react. Jamie stepped forward, tilting his head slightly. He could hear it, the slow, heavy thud of the doctor's heartbeat, the rushing through his veins. A hunger curled in his belly, something deeper than starvation, something old and powerful. "I was gone," Jamie said again, his lips pulling back into a smile that was not entirely his own. "But now, I am not." Knox stumbled back, knocking over a tray of instruments. The clatter echoed through the room, rousing those in the adjoining quarters. Footsteps pounded on the wooden floorboards. Burke and Hare emerged pale with looks of dread and fear painting their faces. Seeing Jamie standing there, his body a patchwork of the doctor's crude work, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Hare was the first to react, reaching for the nearest object, a heavy candlestick. He swung it, aiming for Jamie's head, but Jamie moved faster than he should have been able to. He caught Hare's wrist in a grip like iron. Hare's face contorted in pain as Jamie squeezed, bones grinding together. Burke lunged forward, but Jamie turned on him with unnatural speed, catching him by the throat. He lifted him effortlessly, pinning him against the wall. "I know what you did to me," Jamie murmured, his voice thick with something ancient, something more than rage. "I know what you did to us all." Burke's mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes bulging. Dr. Knox finally found his voice. "Jamie, listen to me. This is beyond science." Jamie's head snapped toward him. "Aye, doctor, that it is. I was gone. But now I am not." And with that, his grip tightened on Burke's throat, and there was a sickening crunch. He went limp. Jamie loosened his grasp and Burke crumbled to the floor. Hare howled, wrenching himself free. He staggered back, cradling his ruined wrist, his breath ragged with terror. He turned to flee, but Jamie was faster, closing the distance in an instant, tossing the man away from the door and back in the direction of Dr. Knox. The men knew, reading the look on Jamie's face, that this was the end. The city would wake to rumors of a mad, rambling, confused man walking through the streets, of the screams that shattered the quiet night. The disappearance of Daft Jamie and the story of Burke, Hare, and Knox would go down in history, but no one would ever know the true fate of Daft Jamie. Some say he vanished that night, slipping into the dark winds of Edinburgh, never to be seen again. Others whisper that he walks still, his hunger never sated, haunting the shadows where the desperate and cruel still prey upon the weak. And on some nights, when the fog rolls thick and the air is void of any other sound, if you listen closely, you might hear a voice, soft and murmuring from the darkness. "I was gone. But now, I am not."